Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, and welcome to another weekend book review. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
We've noticed a lot of you are tuning in, which is amazing, but I haven't quite hit that subscribe button yet.
Yeah, and that little button, honestly, it's so small, but it makes such a huge difference in helping us reach more people with these important discussions.
Right. It's true. Like the algorithms, those mysterious forces that decide what we all see and hear, they pay a lot of attention to subscriber numbers.
Yeah, think of it like the subscribing. It's like casting a vote for quality content, So these insightful research discussions don't just get lost in the sea of all the information out there.
More subscribers equals more visibility. Right. And that means more resources for us to make even deeper dives for you.
Yeah.
Maybe bring in experts for interviews, even do some live Q&A sessions where you can jump in.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about building a community around research,
Yeah.
where curiosity thrives and knowledge is like shared and debated.
Happy International Women's Day, everyone. We thought in honor of today, why don't we dive into a world you might not expect? International relations. But with a twist. We're going to explore how women, often left out of those big history books, actually shape this field. Think Hidden Figures, but for like a global puzzle. Our guide for this deep dive is the book Erased, Rethinking 20th Century International Relations Through the Lives and Work of Forgotten Women Thinkers.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating read.
It is.
And it's not just about adding women to the story, It's about fundamentally changing how we understand the field's very foundations. Did you know international relations, from its very beginning, it had this very specific gendered lens, often focusing solely on, the achievements of men. This book flips that script.
Okay, so we're not talking about just add women and stir. It's about recognizing their influence in all sorts of places, like universities and think tanks, even those elegant salons where they debated ideas over tea and pastries. We'll be uncovering the stories of women like Lucy Barbier, a musician who played a surprisingly key role in early international relations, and Mersey Tate, an African-American scholar who battled racism and sexism at Oxford. These weren't just women in the background.
Exactly. They were active forces shaping the intellectual landscape. Take Lucy Barbier, for instance. Now, she wasn't a professor or a diplomat, but a musician who hosted a salon. Yet she had a huge impact on the field through her relationship with Alfred Zimmern, a prominent figure in early international relations. They fell in love in Aberystwyth in 1919 what the book calls the Lucy Barbier moment. Now, this wasn't just a romantic connection. It profoundly influenced Zimmern's work.
So love and international relations intrigue, but it also makes you think, a salon? Really? How much influence could someone have in such an informal setting?
That's precisely what's so fascinating. It challenges our assumptions about where knowledge is created. We tend to think of, universities as the sole source. But these informal spaces were buzzing with intellectual exchange. And think about the dynamics. Someone like Lucy wielding influence without an official title. It really makes you wonder how that informal power played out, especially in a field dominated by men.
It's like she was a power player behind the scenes. And speaking of power dynamics, the book highlights a fascinating clash between Lucy Zimmern and Nicholas Beichmann, the deputy director of the Geneva School of International Studies. Apparently, there's a bit of a power struggle there.
And this clash, according to the book, wasn't just personal. It actually reflects a major debate in international relations, idealism versus realism.
Oh, yeah.
Now, traditionally, we view this as, a purely intellectual argument. But this book suggests that the personal dynamics between Zimmern and Beichmann actually played a key role in shaping that debate.
Wow, so personal rivalries influencing global theories? That's a history lesson I never got in school.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how many other stories like this are hidden within the grand narratives of international relations. But let's step outside the academic world for a moment. The book also features women who made significant contributions outside of universities. There's Lillian Friedlander, an expert in international labor regulation, who was denied full recognition because she was married to a foreigner. Can you imagine?
Yeah, it's a stark reminder of the invisible barriers women faced, even those with incredible expertise. Her story is a powerful example of how personal circumstances, completely unrelated to someone's intellectual capabilities, could hinder their professional success.
It's like being penalized for falling in love. And then there's Margaret Cleaves, the woman who basically ran the Royal Institute of International Affairs, what we know today as Chatham House. For decades, she managed the institution's research, publications, its entire expansion. Yet she was often relegated to the background.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it? An institution that would become so central to international affairs, shaped significantly by a woman whose contributions were often invisible. Her story, and many others like it, force us to rethink how we define and recognize influence in these fields. It wasn't always about titles or publications, but about the quiet, often unseen work that kept these institutions running and ideas flowing.
It's a real wake-up call to look beyond the surface, to recognize those often hidden contributions. And sometimes these contributions were actively erased, as in the case of Eileen Power. She was a true pioneer at the London School of Economics, creating a whole new way of looking at world politics, historical sociology.
She was a visionary. Eileen Power brought together sociological and economic history to create a much richer and more nuanced analysis of international relations. But despite her groundbreaking work, she was marginalized. It makes you question how many other brilliant minds were pushed aside, not for lack of intellect, but simply for being women in a male-dominated field.
It's heartbreaking and infuriating, but that's why uncovering these stories is so crucial, right? To give them the recognition they deserve, to learn from their insights, and to make sure history doesn't repeat itself. But let's not forget the women who did manage to enter academia, even though they faced an uphill battle the whole way. The book mentions Gulidis Jones, who taught international relations at Cambridge, but faced resistance from those who considered IR a less serious subject.
It speaks to the deeply ingrained biases, even within academia, where certain fields were deemed more masculine or prestigious. Imagine having to constantly fight for the legitimacy of your chosen field simply because you're a woman. It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It's like constantly having to prove your worth over and over again. Another woman who faced similar challenges was Lucy Philip Mayer. She was a brilliant classicist who became a leading scholar in colonial administration and eventually secured a permanent lectureship at LSE. But her journey wasn't easy.
Absolutely. And we can't forget Mirzai Tate, whose story is particularly poignant. She had to navigate both racism and sexism at Oxford. Imagine being one of the few, if not the only, black woman in your field. The resilience it must have taken to overcome those obstacles is truly remarkable.
It's a reminder that for many women, especially women of color, the path to academic success was paved with constant hurdles and discrimination. Their stories make us question how many brilliant minds were lost or discouraged because of these systemic barriers.
It's a sobering thought, but it also emphasizes the importance of creating a more inclusive and equitable academic environment where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their background.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another crucial aspect explored in the book: the intersection of women's personal lives and professional ambitions. It wasn't always a simple choice between family or career. For many, it was about navigating a system that offered little support for those trying to balance both.
It's a theme that, unfortunately, still resonates today. The book delves into the partnership of Hedley Bull, a major figure in international relations, and his wife, Mary Bull, who became an expert in her own right. Their story, while seemingly positive, still reveals how a woman's contributions were often viewed through the lens of her husband's achievements.
It's a subtle but crucial point, isn't it? The book also shares the story of Rachel Wall, a promising scholar at Oxford, who was forced to leave academia due to mental health struggles. It's heartbreaking to think that the system failed to support her, particularly when she was already facing significant challenges.
It's a reminder that academia, despite its focus on knowledge and intellectual pursuit, isn't immune to the pressures and stresses of the outside world, and it underscores the need for more compassion and understanding, especially for those struggling with mental health.
It's about creating a system that values the well-being of its members, not just their academic output. But speaking of remarkable women, let's talk about Susan Strange, perhaps the most influential figure in British international relations. She was a mother of 6.
She truly defied the stereotype of the solitary scholar, proving that motherhood and a groundbreaking career are not mutually exclusive. But it wasn't easy.
She was a bit of a rebel, wasn't she? After returning to UCL full-time after having children, she faced hostility from male colleagues.
And her response? She simply refused to conform. Her resilience is inspiring. Susan Strange didn't just pave the way for future generations of women scholars. She showed us that it's okay to challenge expectations, to carve your own path, even in a field as demanding as international relations.
She was a true trailblazer. But her story, and those of all the women featured in this book, also reveal a common thread. They all challenged the existing power structures, pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable knowledge in international relations.
They forced the field to grapple with issues like race, colonialism, and gender, topics that were often sidelined by the mainstream.
And that's what's so amazing. These women weren't just adding their voices to the conversation. They were fundamentally changing the conversation itself.
Their impact is still felt today, inspiring new generations of scholars to approach international relations with a more critical and inclusive lens. It's like they planted seeds that are still blossoming, expanding our understanding of what international relations really means.
This has been an incredible journey so far. Who knew international relations had such a rich, albeit hidden history? We've barely scratched the surface of this fascinating book, Erased, Rethinking 20th Century International Relations through the lives and work of forgotten women thinkers. But we need to take a pause here. We'll be right back to continue exploring these incredible stories and the lasting impact these women have had on our understanding of the world.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the often overlooked contributions of women to international relations. We've been exploring the stories of these remarkable women, their struggles, their triumphs, and their lasting impact on the field. But these weren't just isolated figures working in a vacuum. Their lives and work were really deeply intertwined with the major events of their time.
That's such an important point. It's easy to think of history as these separate little boxes, but it's really a flowing river,
Right.
Everything connected. So how do these women's stories connect to those larger historical currents?
Well, let's look at Agnes Headlam Morley, for instance. She was a fascinating figure, Oxford's first woman professor and a leading scholar of international relations. She had this really deep understanding of German history and culture, which became particularly relevant during World War II.
It's interesting because she actually wrote a novella called Last Days, which explores the grief of a German mother who lost her son in the war. It really humanizes the impact of conflict, reminding us that war isn't just about abstract political maneuvers, it's about real people and their very personal losses.
That's so true. And what's even more fascinating is that Headlam Morley was a staunch supporter of appeasement before the war, but her experiences during the conflict, especially witnessing the devastation in Germany firsthand, seemed to have a profound impact on her views.
It makes you wonder how our own personal experiences, the things we see and feel, shape our understanding of the world, especially when it comes to something as complex as international relations. It's not just about theories and textbooks, it's about lived realities.
Exactly. It underscores the need for empathy and understanding in our approach to international relations. We can't just focus on the actions of states. We need to consider the human cost of those actions.
It's a powerful reminder to look beyond the headlines and really try to understand the human stories behind those headlines.
Absolutely. And speaking of understanding history, Headlam Morley was also a fierce advocate for diplomatic history as a valid way of studying international relations. She believed in the power of primary sources, like those old diplomatic dispatches and telegrams, to provide a more grounded and nuanced understanding of events.
So she was all about getting into the nitty-gritty details, not just relying on grand narratives or abstract theories.
Exactly. And this was at a time when a more scientific approach to international relations was gaining traction, with a focus on quantitative data and statistical analysis. But Headlam Morley believed that those diplomatic documents offered a unique window into the complexities of international relations that you couldn't get from numbers alone.
It's interesting because that debate about what constitutes valid research in international relations continues even today, doesn't it? Is it all about data and models? Or is there still a place for that deep dive into historical records and those nuanced interpretations of events?
Absolutely. Headlam Morley's work serves as a reminder that there isn't just one right way to study international relations. Different approaches offer different insights, and it's through the interplay of those diverse perspectives that we can get a richer and more complete understanding of this complex field.
It's like having a toolbox with a variety of tools, each one designed for a specific purpose.
Exactly. And speaking of diverse approaches, let's talk about another woman who challenged conventions, Susan Strange. She didn't follow the traditional path to academia. She didn't climb that traditional ladder. Instead, she worked as a journalist for The Economist and The Observer before finally entering academia later in life.
That's fascinating. I bet that journalistic background really shaped her perspective. Journalists are all about getting to the heart of the story, cutting through the noise.
You got it. She was known for her clear, concise writing style, her ability to explain complex issues in a way that everyone could understand, and she wasn't afraid to ruffle feathers to challenge the status quo, even if it meant going against the established academic elite.
She sounds like a force to be reckoned with. And I read that she published on a wide range of topics, from international finance to the role of multinational corporations.
You're right, she did. Susan Strange's work pushed the boundaries of international relations, forcing people to think about the role of non-state actors and how economic and political forces intertwine on the global stage.
She was a true pioneer, wasn't she?
She was indeed. She's considered one of the founders of international political economy, a field that specifically looks at how economics and politics are interconnected globally. And her work is still incredibly relevant today, especially as we grapple with globalization and the increasing power of multinational corporations.
It's amazing to see how these women, often working against the tide, shape the field in such profound ways. And it's not just about individual achievements either. Erased also highlights the collective efforts of women in shaping international relations. One example that comes to mind is the British Coordinating Committee for International Studies, or BCCIS, which was founded in the 1930s.
Oh, that's a great example. The BCCIS was instrumental in promoting the study of international relations in Britain. And you know what? Many of the women we've been discussing were actively involved in that organization. Margaret Cleave, for instance, served as its secretary for many years.
So here we see these women not only making intellectual contributions, but also building the institutions that would support and further the study of international relations. It's like they were laying the groundwork for future generations of scholars.
It's a great point. They weren't just writing books and articles, they were organizing conferences, supporting research projects, and creating a network of scholars dedicated to understanding the complexities of international relations.
It really highlights the importance of those behind-the-scenes roles, the ones that don't always get the spotlight, but are crucial to the success of any endeavor.
Exactly. And, Erased also explores the role of women in the peace movement, which is another aspect of international relations that's often overlooked. Think about Eileen Power, for example. In addition to her academic work, she was deeply involved in organizations that promoted peace and understanding between nations.
It's interesting how she saw peace not just as the absence of war, but as something that needed to be actively built and nurtured through education and cultural exchange.
That's exactly right. She believed that by learning about each other's cultures and perspectives, we could break down barriers and build bridges between people from different backgrounds. And she was a strong advocate for economic justice and equality as well, recognizing that poverty and inequality often create the conditions for conflict.
It's a message that resonates so strongly today, with all the challenges we're facing globally, from climate change to economic disparities. Her work reminds us that international relations isn't just about managing conflict, it's also about building a more just and sustainable world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Couldn't agree more. And it highlights how women have often been at the forefront of these efforts to promote peace and social justice. Their voices and their visions are essential for creating a better future for everyone.
It's been incredible to explore the stories of these remarkable women and to see how their work continues to inspire and inform our understanding of the world.
Absolutely. Their journeys remind us to challenge our assumptions about who shapes knowledge and to look beyond the traditional narratives. And it makes you wonder, what other stories are still out there waiting to be discovered? What other hidden figures have yet to be given their rightful place in history?
These are important questions we should keep asking, but before we dive into that, we need to take a quick break. We'll be back soon to continue our exploration of Erased and the lasting impact of these women on the field of international relations. Welcome back to our deep dive into Erased, rethinking 20th century international relations through the lives and work of forgotten women thinkers. We've been unearthing these stories of these incredible women, how they navigated this male-dominated field and how their contributions often went, unrecognized. But what I find really inspiring is how many of them didn't just challenge academic norms, they challenged the very systems of power that shaped the world.
That's a really great point. The book does a fantastic job of connecting these women's work to those larger currents of, anti-colonial thought and activism that were transforming the world in the mid-20th century. It forces us to think about international relations not just as interactions between states, but as a web of relationships impacted by race and colonialism and social justice.
Yeah, it's like looking at a tapestry and realizing there are all these threads we never noticed before. Threads woven by those who were often, marginalized or silenced.
Exactly. And one of those threads leads us to Claudia Jones, a Trinidadian-born activist and journalist. You might be surprised to hear that she's rarely mentioned in traditional international relations textbooks, but her work is incredibly relevant. She offered this powerful critique of colonialism and capitalism through the West Indian Gazette, which she founded and edited in London.
So she was using media to amplify voices that were often excluded from the mainstream narrative.
Precisely. She was this fierce advocate for West Indian independence and for the rights of Black people both in Britain and globally. Her work highlights how domestic and international politics are deeply intertwined, especially when it comes to issues of race and colonialism.
It's like those lines we draw between domestic and international start to blur when you consider the lived experiences of people who were impacted by colonialism.
Exactly. And Claudia Jones made those connections explicit. She saw those struggles against racism in Britain as part of a global fight for liberation and equality, linking them to, anti-colonial movements in Africa and Asia. She understood that these weren't isolated struggles, but part of a larger movement for social justice.
She wasn't just a theorist, though, right? I read that she was a phenomenal organizer.
Absolutely. Think about the Notting Hill Carnival. Claudia Jones played a key role in its creation. It started as a celebration of Caribbean culture in London, but it's evolved into this huge annual event that celebrates diversity and multiculturalism.
The Notting Hill Carnival. That's incredible. It's this vibrant example of how international relations plays out in everyday life, shaping the cultural landscape of cities and nations.
It's a beautiful example of how cultural expression can be a powerful force for social change, and a reminder that international relations isn't just about diplomats and treaties. It's about the people, their cultures, and their lived experiences.
It makes you wonder how many other seemingly local events or movements have these global roots and connections.
Yeah. It's an invitation to look deeper, to consider those hidden histories and the diverse voices that shape them. And that brings us back to a point we've been touching on throughout this deep dive, that complicated relationship between race and empire and the development of international relations as a field.
It's a topic that's often uncomfortable to discuss, but absolutely essential if we want to understand the power dynamics that have shaped our world.
You're so right. And one of the most important contributions of Erased is how it centers the experiences of Black women scholars who often faced a double burden of discrimination, both because of their race and their gender.
We talked earlier about Mirza Tate and her struggles to find a permanent academic position in the U.S., despite her impressive qualifications, including a degree from Oxford. Her story, and others like it, really highlight the systemic biases that have kept so many brilliant minds out of the conversation.
It's infuriating and heartbreaking. To think that someone like Mirza Tate, with all her talent and potential, could be denied opportunities simply because of her race and gender. It makes you question how different the field of international relations might look if those voices had been amplified and those perspectives included from the very beginning.
It's a stark reminder that who gets to participate in knowledge creation, whose voices are considered legitimate, is a question of power.
And that's a question we need to keep asking, not just in academia, but in all aspects of international relations. Whose perspectives are being prioritized? Whose stories are being told?
This has been such an eye-opening journey, exploring this hidden history of international relations through the lives of these remarkable women. It's clear that Erased isn't just a book about women, it's a book about challenging the very foundations of how we understand the world.
It's an invitation to think critically about the narratives we've inherited, to seek out those missing voices, and to imagine a more inclusive and equitable future for international relations.
It's a call to action, to ask ourselves what we can do to ensure that the field reflects the full richness and complexity of human experience. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this International Women's Day deep dive. It's been an honor to explore these stories with you and to celebrate these incredible women.
Yes, absolutely. Happy International Women's Day, everyone.
We hope that this conversation has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to continue exploring those hidden histories that shape our understanding of the world. Who knows what other fascinating discoveries await? Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more captivating deep dives like this one. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.